brother Chancellor, I hope you would permit me to go ahead without going through what you've said in terms of recognizing people here in relation to protocol.
So,
let me express my profound gratitude to the Chancellor, Chair and members of Council of this great institution for the honor bestowed on me this morning.
so,
It is an honor I accept with humility and proudly share with Nananum, whose joint efforts have contributed to everything we have achieved in the 25 years of our reign.
So,
And they are well represented here with my brother Asantehene, who is chairman of the Council of State. They've all been very supportive of me within the last 25 years. Nanam Pohima is signaling me and everything, I know.
so,
The establishment of one institution may not count very much in the scheme of national development, but I will suggest that one of the many visionary acts of our first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was a decision to establish a university focused on education with the task of producing the quality manpower needed for the education of the people of Ghana.
so,
And there could not be a better place to have the honor of hosting such a university than the city of Cape Coast.
so,
Osaberima, your city is where the light of higher education in this nation was lit, inspiring a thirst for knowledge and drawing thousands from every corner of the land to drink from its fountain of knowledge.
so,
We owe it to the churches for their initiative in establishing and laying the foundations of secondary education on a grand scale.
so,
From Infantsipim and Wesley Girls School to Adesado College, Holy Child and St. Augustine's, the Methodist Church, the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church led the way in providing the best in education and in conditions of gender equality long before the value of inclusivity gained universal acceptance.
so,
This university, on whom we have to depend for the training of our teachers, stands as a crowning jewel of a city of enlightenment, from whose commanding hills and sandy beaches millions of the best brains in our land have been molded, have grown the best talents who have kept the administration of our nation.
so,
This university began life in 1962 as the University College of Education, in a special relationship with the University of Ghana, Legon, with the prime mandate of producing graduate teachers to meet the manpower needs of the Ghana Education Service.
so,
It seems unbelievable today to recall that its total enrollment as at that time was 155 students, split between two departments, the Department of Science and the Arts. And the whole concept was deemed controversial in some circles. However, it survived the political upheavals of the period, and in 1971, it attained the status of a fully fledged university with the right to grant its own degrees.
so,
The mandate of the university was expanded beyond the needs of education, and today it is a Belgian community of over 75,000 students from all disciplines.
so,
The founding fathers and their pioneering administrators have every reason to be proud of what they have bequeathed to the nation. And long may we continue to herald the achievements of this university. But even as we exalt these achievements and honor those whose hard work has made it possible, we cannot but pause and reflect on the fates and fortunes of the single subject for which this university was created, and I speak of education.
so,
It remains quite problematic to me that 60 years down the line, we are still grappling with the same challenges that informed the decision to establish this university in the first place.
so,
Some historical background may be appropriate here. Although the Gold Coast carried the tag of a model colony, less than 10% of our population had been to school by 1951, when the people were allowed to elect the first nationalist government led by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah under the limited self-rule mandate.
so,
The government took the view that education was the key to the development of the country, and consequently launched the accelerated education program to accelerate the pace and level of education.
so,
Additionally, a program of adult education was launched to drive the home mass literacy. In 1951, total enrollment in primary schools was 154,000, middle schools 66,000, secondary and technical schools 3,550, teacher training colleges 1,916. The total enrollment of the university college, the forerunner of the University of Ghana, Legon, was 208 students. By 1961, enrollment had zoomed to over 210% for primary schools, 142% for middle schools, a staggering 438% for secondary and technical schools, 137% for teacher training, and an astonishing 478% for universities. It is important to note that the bulk of this expansion was funded by the state. Indeed, even the churches which had been carrying the financial burden of education at the height of the colonial administration were required to gradually disengage. Following the overthrow of the First Republic, the eminent scholar Professor Alex Kwapong headed a commission to undertake the first of what has become a seemingly unending series of reforms of the education system. The Kwapong Committee recommended the adoption of 6 years of primary school followed by 4 years of secondary education with 2 years of advanced certificate leading to a 3-year university course. Less than 4 years after the Kwapong reforms, another military coup led to the establishment of another committee, this time led by the Dean of the Faculty of Education of this university, Professor N.K. Zobo, to review the reform. The Professor Zobo Committee made social equity a fundamental thrust in the delivery of sound educational outcomes, arguing against the common entrance examination for the selection of pupils for secondary schools, as skewed in favor of children of the elite in society. Specifically, it recommended a new system which retained the 6-year primary school system, but split the secondary system into 3 years of junior high school and 2 years of senior secondary school lower division and 2 years of senior secondary upper division. The Zobo report formed the basis for the far-reaching reforms of 1987. In preparing for the restoration of constitutional rule in 1992, the Republican Constitution provided for free compulsory education for all children of school age within 10 years. The new government led by Flight Lieutenant Rawlins's government launched a program of free compulsory universal education in 1996. In a seminal study for the British Department of International Development, Nimoy, Thompson, and Leslie Casireford observed in 2008, broadly, the objectives of FQ were in line with the recommendations of the World Declaration on Education for All, adopted after the World Bank UN-sponsored World Conference on Education for All in Thailand in 1990. The declaration stated that every person, child, youth, and adult shall be able to benefit from educational opportunities designed to meet their basic learning needs, and all countries were required to achieve universal basic education by the year 2000. The rollout of FQ was followed by a National Education Forum in November 1999 to examine the prospects of Ghana moving towards compliance with the World Declaration on Education for All. Barely 2 or 3 years after, in 2002, another education sector review was undertaken to examine the outcome. Since then, every government has undertaken a serious review of education system. The troubling fact, however, is that each review has either been driven by austerity of any fiscal downturn. Against such background, the mixed response to the recent free senior high school scheme has not been a surprise. The Minister of Education here will want to do more, but he doesn't have adequate funds to do what he wants to do. There's no doubt that the free senior high school program is the most audacious piece of social intervention in our Fourth Republic. The pre-independence program for free education covered primary education and later the university. The secondary sector was beyond the capacity of the state. None of the reforms since had dared move the dial through that space. The decision to take the plunge, therefore, had to be truly ambitious, and it is no wonder it has kept a argument that if we are preparing our children to compete in the global economy of today, then they should be entitled to the same level of basic education as children in other climates. Since basic education elsewhere encompasses secondary or high schools, it's only fair that we also upgrade our basic education. National Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity, Shakira Mustafa and Phillips Crowns noted with reference to primary schools products. The completion of primary school is no guarantee that surveys in a number of low-income countries document that many adults who have received some schooling 5 or 6 years or less are functionally illiterate or enumerate. That is an experience Ghana identifies with, and it buttresses the case for upscaling basic education. But this cannot be that simple. It only underscores the enormity of the challenge associated with the changing dynamics of education and nation building in our times. Ghanaians accept education as a basic right of every child. All nations signed up through the United Nations and its agencies to provide basic education for all. In Africa, education is deemed so critical, the African Union has declared the year of African year, this year, the African Year of Education. In Ghana, it has been part of the objective of every government from as far apart as the nationalist government of limited self-rule in 1951. We see it not just as a human right, it is an economic necessity, an investment in the economic and social well-being of every nation. In the background paper already cited, the authors made the point that when any child fails to acquire basic skills needed to function as a productive, responsible member of society, society as a whole, not to mention the individual child, loses. The cost of educating children is far outweighed by the cost of not educating them. Yet, though the cost of not providing education would ultimately be higher, nations have to contend in the first place with the overriding problem of mobilizing the resources needed to invest in education. Without the resources, even our most desirable goals cannot be achieved, and that sadly has been the problem not only for Ghana but for Africa. It is the reason we are obliged to make sure that our ambitions are matched by our pockets. As we have already noted, every educational reform undertaken in Ghana has been driven by financial constraints arising from national economic malice. Whereas in the developed world, educational reforms are undertaken to ensure the content of education matches the economic and social needs of society, here we are driven solely by what is available to spend in the fiscal space. It is for this reason that even an audacious scheme like the free senior high school, as I've mentioned, which one would expect to receive universal acclamation, has instead been mired in some controversy, with some blaming it for exacerbating the fiscal malice of the economy. And yet, even with that program, Ghana has yet to reach the universal benchmark for national spending on education as a percentage of gross domestic product. In the latest UNESCO World Education Finance Watch Report of 2024, the scorecard which monitors progress towards achieving the universal benchmark for spending on education showed that overall, only the high-income countries are more likely to be classified as either having achieved or having a high probability of 75% of achieving the 2025 benchmark for spending on education. The good news for us, however, is that Ghana is one of the only 15 developing countries confirmed as being on track to reach the benchmark in 2025. In effect, assuming the current program continues, we should meet the universal benchmark for spending on education to GDP. That certainly should be welcome. But if the focus is on the rebalancing of resources, the effect may well stir up more heat than light. Every dramatic increase in enrollment affects the physical resources and infrastructure of schools, affects learning materials, and above all, requires a corresponding increase in the number of qualified teachers. Beyond these, as we have experienced more than once in the past 2 decades, every expansion at the secondary level has a huge impact on the tertiary sector, and yet at no time have we seen an attempt to coordinate the implementation of any secondary sector reform with the universities. When at a stroke, enrollment in senior high schools are doubled, the universities have to brace themselves for an inevitable surge in demand for undergraduate studies with no prior consideration for its effect on fiscal resources. Our universities are already bursting at the seams, with rising student population virtually overwhelming fiscal resources and infrastructure. It should be obvious that important as the senior high school may be, focus on it should not lead to a misalignment of resources, nor should it become the focus of all attention in national discourse. Rather, we should recognize the necessity to look at the challenge of education in its totality. First, we may do well to re-examine the structure of the education system from primary to secondary to tertiary education. Is the separation between junior and senior high school working? What has become of the products of junior high school who are unable to proceed to senior high school? How functional have the vocational institute become? How relevant have they been in the job market? Is the system providing for the critical middle level needs as we expected the polytechnic and technical universities to provide? Secondly, we need another look critically at the financing of education. What resources are available and how they are allocated to the various levels to ensure equity. This is at the root of all the discourse. Education is an expensive investment. The expenditure on buildings alone is huge, but buildings alone do not provide education. Learning and teaching materials must be available. In the 21st century, there should be no school without computers, without the means to provide the basic ICT skills. And we should ensure our teachers are reasonably remunerated for the critical service they provide. Thirdly, we need to reappraise the content of education from pre-tertiary to tertiary to see how far they go to meet the needs of the economy and society in this fast-changing world. There are many areas of the system crying for updating and many anomalies requiring correction. The ongoing prioritizing of STEM education is a step in the right direction, but it is necessary to caution about the risk of restricting it to an elite class and leaving the broader system with no knowledge of these critical skills. For the sake of equity, we should ensure equal opportunities for all to acquire these vital skills in their education journey. Education must lead the nation's response to the incredible challenges of climate change. If we are to fully appreciate the gravity of the threat to our planet and come to terms with what needs to be done to obviate the consequences, our education system must infuse in us, from the pre-primary stage to the tertiary, the science and the knowledge which should guide our actions. It is the only way we are going to make it possible for our communities to appreciate the necessity to protect our forests and our river bodies and restore the respect which our forefathers had for their environment. We need to reflect seriously on how we refocus education to guide us towards a sustainable world. I'm sure this audience will share the need for considerable reappraisals at the tertiary level to ensure our universities are fully aligned to the needs of society. It is right for the nation that we seek to maintain high standards in our universities, but it will be astonishing to demand higher entry requirements for some courses than the renowned Ivy League and Oxbridge universities in the United States and Europe. I find it incomprehensible that we have deliberately capped the number of students our universities should admit for medicine and law, even though we have a huge vacancy of doctors and a burgeoning number of students who have met all the qualifying standards. We have the absurd situation in which parents of Ghanaian students have to find foreign exchange to send their children to Europe and other places to study medicine abroad and then return to be employed by the Ghana Health Service. Assuming there are some impediments in the way of increasing the intake of students, would it not make more sense to remove those impediments to allow for all qualified students to gain admission and perhaps offer space for foreign students who will pay as in foreign currency.
Zoom.
Beyond these key professions, it remains a sore issue whether our education system is producing the skill set needed to keep business and industry moving. But however we may try within the educational establishment to refocus education, it will be to no avail unless we can get the national economy into good shape.
Zoom.
It remains incontrovertible that only the state can deliver the resources needed to achieve the goal of education for all. And only a strong, resilient, and sustainable economy can generate the needed resources.
Zoom.
Because education is so critical for the state and the state is correspondingly critical for education, I see the need for a special kind of relationship between the state and the education establishment.
Zoom.
Mr. Chancellor, Chair, you will be aware that we made education the focus of our reign when we ascended the Golden Stool 25 years ago.
Zoom.
As a concrete expression of our commitment, we established our education fund, which has become an example of the support that education can derive from non-state actors.
Zoom.
I've also had the privilege to be the Chancellor of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. As Chancellor, by the way, I was appointed by the university, not the government.
Zoom. Zoom.
As Chancellor, I've had the task of lending support to the university establishment as it struggles to obtain the resources they need in pursuit of their goals, while through the Education Fund, we have tried to demonstrate what non-state actors within the community can do to generate resources to support education.
Zoom.
Combining the role of both the mobilizer and consumer of educational resources has given me a perspective from which to ponder some troubling questions.
Zoom.
Is education delivering the goals and objectives for Ghana? Has education delivered the intended outcomes? Has education justified the sacrifices it has demanded of the people? Has Ghana education been truly fit for purpose? If these questions come as a shock to the nation, and probably more so to this audience, it can only be because we have avoided the need for continuous critical evaluation of the outcome of our investments, not only in education but in several other spheres.
Zoom.
Regardless of the lapses and shortfalls, it is incontrovertible that as a nation, Ghana has invested enormous resources in education. The explosion in tertiary education has produced a multitude of highly educated men and women with the skills set to manage and direct the affairs of the nation.
Zoom.
In every sector of our society, our affairs are in the hands of actors who are not just educated but highly qualified.
Zoom.
Our political class, at both executive and the legislative levels, with responsibility for policy formulation and direction, is led and dominated by men and women who are highly educated. We have a judiciary service which is very highly educated. But
Zoom.
my lady Barbara,
Zoom.
Our banks and insurance services are highly educated. Our civil service is highly educated. Our customs and internal revenue service actors are very highly educated. Our police and security services are highly educated. Our military is highly educated. Logically, you would expect this output of highly educated leaders to translate into greater efficiency in the management of our affairs, particularly in the management of the national economy.
Zoom.
So when I hear the endless lamentations about our economy is in distress, when I see our legislature in gridlock, unable to agree on issues of national interest, when I'm told about the decline in public confidence in law enforcement, I can't help asking myself, is that what education can deliver for all our investment and all our sacrifices?
Zoom. Zoom.
We should not forget that financing education has required enormous sacrifices. Through the worst of economic circumstances, the state has been obliged to devote a considerable percentage of our tax revenue to education.
Zoom.
Ironically, the bulk of this revenue will come from farmers, some of whom are the least educated and probably the poorer section of society, So we have the incongruous situation of the poor financing the education of the rich.
Jump.
Finally, we have the personal sacrifices parents make in the education of their wards.
Jump.
All these sacrifices are justified as investments in the future well-being of their wards and society as a whole.
Jump.
But if the outcome of education is to produce an army of skilled and able young men and women who cannot find jobs to aptly apply their acquired skills, and if continually we are confronted with questions about competency in the management of our resources,
Jump.
how can we respond to anyone who questions the ultimate value we place in education?
Jump.
By raising the question, we do not seek to cast doubt on the value of education per se. We are rather prodding the nation, and particularly academia, to be alive to the necessity of undertaking a rigorous evaluation of the outcome of education relative to the benefits accruing to the nation, to give us the tools to correct any lapses before public confidence is eroded.
Jump.
In fact, the situation we face reinforces the need for a special relationship between academia and the state.
Jump.
There was a period in our history during the First Republic when academia was deemed to be closeted in an ivory tower, a distance away from the real world. That is no longer an issue. You are as integrated into society and in tune with its pulse as it is possible to be.
Jump.
You are the teachers who are preparing and mentoring the men and women who are taking control of our lives as political leaders, judges, economists, bankers, mandarins, diplomats, military and police officers. As teachers, you are like parents who should have a lifetime interest in the performance of your students.
Jump.
As their success inspires you, so their failure should burden you.
Jump.
Beyond the personal relationship between teacher and student, there's an even greater linkage that needs to be strengthened. The university is the storehouse of knowledge. All the knowledge required for nation building. More than the storehouse of knowledge, a university is the laboratory for research, cultivation and discovery of answers to the social, physical needs of society. You will all be aware of how much the works of universities have informed policies that have shaped countries and have revolutionized society,
Jump.
countries and societies through time.
Jump.
Much of the scientific and other discoveries that have revolutionized society owe their roots to the universities and to the collaboration between universities and either the state or private business.
Jump.
Unfortunately, in our country, there's hardly any evidence of the meaningful collaboration that needs to exist between the state and the universities. Perhaps one reason the role of academia has been downplayed is that we have allowed the abrasive political divisions to permeate our sacred campuses
Jump.
and turn them into battlegrounds for partisan combat instead of havens for imbibing and dispensing knowledge.
Jump.
It is time, in my view, for all of us to wake up to the negative impact this has caused and make an effort to reverse the situation.
Jump.
We can begin fashioning a new relationship between state and academia that engages the expertise of academia in the process of policy formulation on a continuous basis.
Jump.
I have no doubt about how beneficial it will be for the country to create a unique quadrangle of experts from academia, business leaders, traditional leaders, and government, tasked to address the seemingly intractable problems of the economy.
Jump.
This could be the beginning of continuous collaboration between academia, the state, and captains of business in finding solutions to many of our social problems.
Jump.
For this to happen, however, we will need academia to wean itself of gross partisanship and cultivate and enshrine a culture of rigorous objectivity.
Jump.
This should allow the universities, as a collective responsibility, to establish the right mechanism for rigorous continuous evaluation of the performance of national institutions and help inject some efficiency into the system.
Jump.
It should help us inspire a new era in which the achievement of measurable national goals take precedence over the pursuit of personal gains,
Jump.
with an environment in which the state can reach out across party boundaries to draw on the patriotic service of its experts without attracting unwelcome labels.
Jump.
The good thing is that there's more than a silver lining ahead. Ghana remains one country in whom nobody can afford to lose confidence.
Jump.
Given the combined human and natural resources at our disposal and the heritage from which we have grown, we will only fail if we want to. And I don't believe there's any Ghanaian who contemplates failure anytime. Let's hope then that we will not give in to any doctrine of despair, but rise with the challenge to herald a new era for Ghana.
Jump.
Thank you, UCC, for the honor, and let's forge ever forward to glorious future. Thank you.
Jump. Jump.